Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. Big news for Springbok fans, with SA Rugby confirming that they will be reviewing the ticket prices for Springbok matches at the end of 2026. It's been a very contentious issue after we've seen lots of empty seats across the first 3 games that Springboks have played this year, and a lot of the fans saying they just simply don't have the buying power to be able to access Springbok tickets, which have gone up exponentially in the last few years. And we even saw SA Rugby having to slash tickets for the Ellis Park test. And they have confirmed that they are basically taking all the feedback on board and that they will review things in 2026 with a view of trying to make it more accessible for Springbok fans in 2027. Before we get into it, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. So I think this is a big win for the consumer, for Bok fans, and a little bit of an L inverted commas for SA Rugby, and they've had to just take it on the chin, I think, because they've had to really up their revenue because of the increased expenditure on teams. I mean, for example, to run the Springboks cost SA Rugby 281 million rand last year. That is obviously your travel or traveling with all the families, your extended alignment camps, your coaches' salaries, your player contributions, and. So, I mean, it's a remarkable amount of money to spend on a single team, considering that all the other national teams cost 221 million. So the price of running your sevens programs, your under 20s, your women's are all less than running the Springboks in their current genesis. And there's a reason the Springboks are the top of the world. That kind of investment is a big part of it. But at the end of the day, whilst SA Rugby did announce a loss last year of 40 million rand, which in the grand scheme of things is pretty negligible considering that their revenues were 2 billion rand. You know, the reality is, just because things have gotten more expensive and that they are recording a loss, it doesn't mean that the fans can afford to foot the bill that they've kind of sort of created. And they kind of hit out and basically said, we recorded a loss in 2025, and that's what Mark Alexander says here. So the allegations of greed are unfounded. But I think that, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think that just because you make a loss doesn't mean you can justify charging the kind of ticket prices. You know, at the end of the day, that's, I think, a bit of a simplistic way of putting it. So at the end of the day, we've gotten progress. You know, the fans have come out and said, this is just not accessible. Pundits have been very outspoken. Nick Mallett and a lot of ex-pros have said South Africans need to be able to watch their national team. They deserve to watch their national team. You know, your middle income families should be able to go to a Bok game relatively easily. You know, it should be accessible. We can't pigeonhole the Boks as a team that can only be consumed by the elite when you then drive around with buses branded, you know, Forever Stronger and Stronger Together and Pride Gees Ubuntu, but then you basically can only be watched by a select few because you sort of priced the rest of the market up here. And it's an interesting situation because SA Rugby have completely reset their commercialization of SA Rugby itself in the last couple of years. And we've seen their sponsorship revenue grow from like 200, 300 million to over 700 million rand last year. You know, our broadcast revenue last year was over 600 million rand. They've basically taken on the running of the events of Springbok games. You know, they're now sort of taking over stadiums basically and running the entire match day experience. That yielded, I think, 400 million rand at a cost of 214. So that was a very big revenue generator for SA Rugby. And they've got lots of costs to cover. Obviously, costs are going to go down a little bit in the next couple of years because we are now full members of the URC. We're full members of EPCR, and we will be getting those 4 franchises will be getting revenue out or further revenue out of those competitions. You know, hopefully the idea is that they will become more or less self-sustainable and, you know, won't rely on SA Rugby basically funding their full kind of program. The Lions, Stormers, Bulls, Sharks need to become pretty self-sustainable and have the sponsors, and within the kind of those budgets, be able to work and compete. Obviously, there will need to be assistance from SA Rugby in the forms of contributions towards player salaries, for example, maybe towards travel costs and the likes of that. But that's going to save SA Rugby a bit of money. And then obviously, you know, 40 million rand, again, I said it's negligible. It's a lot of money, but compared to 2 billion rand, you know, it's not that much. You know, it really isn't. So they will, I think, turn a very big profit this year, especially with the Greatest Rivalry Tour, which will be a big commercial success, and they get obviously 50% of that revenue. This is so basically in terms of what Mark Alexander said, he said our commercial strategies are designed to cover the cost of running rugby in South Africa, not to increase profits. So yes, it is a cost recovery basis, and you have to run the costs of running rugby. But I think there are levels to the game to a certain degree. We don't, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. Things like flying the families of the Springboks all over the world, kind of be there in end of year tours and at World Cups and at every sort of week, is quite a nice luxury to have. And yes, does that help us get our level performances up? Does it help to have extra coaching staff, who could be earning R1 million a year? Yes, yes, yes. But there are also things where I think if you had to cut, they kind of can cut. But the big thing is, we're so dominant at the moment that we want to keep that kind of dominance. And as a result, we've basically said, well, this is the environment. This is an ideal situation. And SA Rugby is now tasked with fulfilling that ideal situation. And unfortunately, we have seen the consumer take a hit as a result because Bok tickets have gone up by more than 200% in the last few years. They've doubled almost twice. To be able to say that your cheapest ticket to go and watch at Ellis Park was essentially 950 Rand. They spoke about for as little as 500 Rand, but that was essentially like 1,000 tickets. And after that, you're paying, you want to go basically sit in a lower tier with your family of 4, you're paying like 10,000 Rand. And if you're like, you're talking about middle income families where the combined family income, monthly income could be 30,000 Rand, or 20,000 Rand, 25,000 Rand, assuming that both people are working at a reasonable job. That's can genuinely be kind of your net household income. And now you've got to spend a third of that, on taking your family to the Bok game before you've factored in petrol, which has gone up. And so the Springboks did also speak about that. SA Rugby mentioned the fact that there obviously was the war in Iran and petrol price, but I think over and above that, the ticket prices were just completely over the top, especially in compared to the pro tiers, your Bafana tickets, your URC tickets, and it is not the same product, but at the same time, you could go and watch 4 days of like live golf, which is very commercial, is very inverted commas overpriced, for the same price as watching the Boks for 80 minutes at Ellis Park. And you're looking at some of the golfers, for example, on display. And the reason I make that comparison is that's probably the biggest event that we've had this year in comparison to a Bok game. So should the Springboks be the most expensive thing to watch in the country? Arguments say yes, it is, but to a degree. It still has to be accessible. So in terms of what's going to actually happen, they've said that rugby is not only a sport, but also a powerful driver of national pride and international recognition. Our objective is clear: to balance the financial sustainability of the sport with the imperative of keeping rugby accessible to all South Africans. Accordingly, SA Rugby will review our ticketing framework for the 2027 season and beyond, and we will implement the necessary adjustments to ensure that our approach remains both sustainable and supporter focused. I think at the end of the day, I think they've overestimated to the degree people are going to sacrifice to go watch the Boks. There are people who save up for all year to go watch the Boks, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that is, if you go to one Bok game in your life, phenomenal. And there are people that like kind of treat that, but we need to be very cognizant of the financial reality of South Africans at the moment, and that they are struggling. There are lots of South Africans, they are on their knees, they just don't have the buying power. If you look at the inflation, you look at the cost of living crisis, you look at the salaries people are earning, they can no longer make the sacrifice of a few things and be able to go to a Bok game. Going to a Bok game has become too big a sacrifice, and it's impacting people's actual living to be able to access it. So it's a big win at the end of the day, and hopefully we will see full stadiums next year of Bok fans with a nice variety. People who have never watched the Boks before going to their first game, and not just sort of your same old kind of elite class in South Africa, or your upper middle class who are going every year because they're the only ones that can afford it. It's a big win for Boks, and I suppose credit to SA Rugby for taking it on board. I think that it was a bit of a panic at Ellis Park, and they've continuously tried to speak. And I was there at a launch last year, and they were speaking about the ticket prices, and they were trying to sort of say, but you see, if you look at the overseas things and how much us costs, and at the end of the day, you can use any metric you want to justify this. You could go and say this is actually the cheapest international rugby ticket in the world. If you don't have the money, you don't have the money, and that's the problem. It's not about your product and the value for money. It's not about, but in the grand scheme of things, to same thing with Supersport. People talk about Supersport's got the best broadcast package in the world. For just R1,000, you get all of that sport. You don't get that anywhere else in the world. And people are saying, cool, but we don't have the R1,000. It doesn't matter how good the value for money is. If you don't have the money, you don't have the money. Hopefully, you won't need that kind of money next year. And it's exciting. It's exciting because the Boks are playing, at a level that we've never seen before. And we need to see as many South Africans experience that as possible. We've got a golden era at the moment, and we need to make sure that as many people get to experience what it is to go to a Bok game. Because I've done it on several occasions, and it is incredible. And more people deserve, especially during these tough times, especially when things are hard, to be able to go to an experience like that and be able to forget about everything and just enjoy the Boks for 80 minutes and just absolutely love it for a day. That's something special that we can't take away from South Africans. So it's good news. 2 thumbs up. What are your thoughts? Is this SA Rugby having to now scale back? Did they overestimate their reach, for example, or is this just in line with the current circumstances that have changed throughout the year that they've now made it, and that's kind of, they were right in doing kind of ticket prices and things have just changed since? What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below.